This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Allison Cook, Lindsay Trebet, and Super Inframan. If you'd like to help support the show, you can do so at wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I am joined by Wren Collier.
Hey everyone.
And Greg Bishop.
Hello.
Of Radio Mysterioso.
That's the show. The occasional show that shows up when you least expect it, yeah.
This is true. Tonight we're talking about The Eighth Tower, which is a book by John Keel that came out in 1975. And it's definitely, I think, one of his weirder books, as much as most of his books are not exactly non-speculative, grounded type of things. Anyway, this one, he really speculates a lot on a lot of different things, basically around the idea of a superspectrum and ultra-terrestrials.
Yeah, I think it's probably along with Mothman Prophecies and what's the other one?
Disneyland?
No, that was a little later one, which is kind of reiterating what he was saying before. But God, I can't think of any of his other books right now. But
Strange Creatures as Time and Space?
No, another.
Operation Trojan Horse?
That's it.
Okay.
Along with Trojan Horse and Mothman Prophecies, I think this is like the trilogy of you must read to understand Keel books. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Am I correct in thinking that this book was, because I don't know where I heard this, I can't source this claim, but that this book was kind of like the B-sides to the Mothman Prophecies? Like it was a lot of kind of essays that he was going to include in that, but just for length it kind of got turned into its own book?
I don't know.
I did not hear that, and go ahead.
No, I've heard that somewhere. I can't think of a source, but it certainly feels that way. I mean, like a lot of this stuff is basically, it seems like essays he was writing around at the same time as the Mothman Prophecies, because a lot of the ideas in this kind of flow right out of the stuff he talks about in Mothman.
Yeah, because when he was working on all the weird stuff happened to him, or he thinks happened to him, or people pranked him and happened to him. But all this stuff was going on around then, and I think it really affected the evolution of his ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And the ideas are, I think if you take Eighth Tower and a lot of his stuff absolutely literally, you're making a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's like looking at a painting or listening to a song and taking it literally.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I feel like this book is kind of in the tradition, or rather, the Crypto-Terrestrials is in the tradition of the Eighth Tower, but what I mean is it's sort of a jazz session of a book about Fortean topics. It kind of has an overarching theme, him talking about the super spectrum, but all in all, it's kind of just him just exploring a bunch of different ideas and ruminating on things. There's no big answers or, realizations in it, but it's just a fun read of him kind of working through some ideas that he's going through.
And there are some really good ideas in it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was thinking about before the show today, and I was thinking Keel was the most Fortean of the 20th century after Ford, possibly with the exception of William Corliss and maybe Jerome Clark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, Keel, like far and away to me, is like if you had to have a spiritual, ancestor to Fort, it would have been Keel, because he takes everything Fort did and then kicks it into the late 20th century in a way that fits just perfectly in the latter half of the 20th century, in the way that Fort fit perfectly in the first half of the 20th century.
True.
Or early anyway, when he was doing what he was. Well, up to half, because the thing is, the Fortean Society went on after he continued after he passed away, up into, I think, the 40s, when Tiffany Thayer, whoever it was head of it, died. In fact, the Tiffany Thayer collection at the New York Public Library have all of Ford's papers, or as much as
yeah. Okay. Well, one of the things that he makes a couple of bold claims in here that turn out to be completely wrong. He talks about religious apparitions, and he says, before the end of the century, we will have a complete scientific explanation, and many of our religious and occult beliefs will have been revised or abandoned altogether. I mean,
it makes a lot of predictions, some of which are frighteningly prescient, and the other ones that are totally wrong. But the thing is that when he made them, they were kind of exciting and forward thinking, and seemed pretty possible if you bought into his, his shtick. Which I do. When I first read it, whenever it was, and when I was a kid, I probably believed that. It's like, all right, science is going to be like, magic, and it won't be just like magic; it will be magic. Yay! Yeah.
Yeah, at some point he correctly predicts the use of magnetic stripe credit cards, which is a bizarre thing for him just to throw out there. But then too, at another point he says something about neurotoxic snake venom traveling along the nerves. Yeah. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's not how snake venom works.
And he was a herpetologist, supposedly, an amateur one, so he should know that. Was that in vogue then?
I don't know. I actually had to go and look up just to make sure that my own herpetology knowledge wasn't mistaken. But sure enough, it's the venoms still travel through the blood. They just affect different parts of the body. But yeah, I don't know where he got that from.
I don't know. Maybe he made it up, like a lot of other stuff he said. But the thing like I said, if you take Keel literally, then you're going to be pissed and lost.
For sure.
It was also 1975, so maybe the understanding of how that worked was different in 1975 or whenever he learned it.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, it might be. He might as well have been talking about humors or earth, air, fire, and water or something for that time. But
yeah. He also makes the comment that he thinks Velikovsky will be accepted by new scientists that are coming up at the time, and that Velikovsky's ideas would be accepted by the end of the century or something like that. And I'm like, well, that didn't happen. Now did it?
No, but given what he was talking about, how he was talking about it, and his universe, his philosophy, whatever you want to call it, that would have been totally possible.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's like, okay, all this stuff is weird now, but it won't be weird later. So what would be the implications of that? Maybe people will believe Velikovsky. And he's partially right, because things are changing to accept some of the things that he talked about.
Slowly. There's
very slowly. In slightly different ways. But, the fact that of science saying, okay, what the hell is going on here? We got to take a look at this.
Yeah, but they still want to exclude the electric universe idea as much as possible. Even when they admit there's electrical stuff going on, they still try to kind of bulk ward against it. It's just ingrained in this idea that you have to fight against the electric universe idea for some reason.
Yeah, and catastrophism and everything else. Yep. Well, that's fine. I don't. So what? You take what you can get. I mean,
that's
the fact
true.
that I can have somebody on that's a biological anthropologist talking about time traveling aliens, and he's a I don't know if he's tenured, but he is a professor at what is it, Montana, Michael Masters, that he could talk about something like that. The guy would 10 years ago, 20 years ago, certainly nobody in his position would have ever said such a thing in public.
That is true. That is very true.
So, Keel was around, he'd be probably be saying, yep, I predicted that, and he'd be partially right.
And also I realized, this being published in 1975, a lot of this book was probably written before the whole abduction thing kicked in. I mean, Benny and Buddy Hill was the 60s, but there weren't a ton of abduction cases by this point. So, his encounter cases are not the typical abduction cases that he talks about in here.
It's mostly contactee or channeling kind of experiences, yeah.
But the points are well taken. Because he said, anybody that gets near this stuff is made a little crazy. This is what I think we probably talked about this on the other show, is that if you have and I think I probably pulled it straight off of Keel, but what I keep telling people, friends of mine that suddenly say, oh my God, I've got the answer, and blah, 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 and they go down this thing, it's like, I've seen this so many times. It's happened to me. The UFO thing is designed to find the loose thread and just yank it and unravel you if you let it. And this is what Keel points out in this book very specifically about people that have encounters with this weird thing or this other intelligence or whatever he calls it in the book.
I honestly wonder about that, about how it does yank people's threads because of, like, Keel warns time and time again of, like, the danger of interacting with these entities and stuff. But, given my own background and knowledge about how we interacted with, let's say, the more than human in the past, I feel like what has caused what Keel's describing, this unraveling of people when they come into contact with it, is largely the fault of modern society not having, especially because of materialism, not having any kind of framework to deal with these entities, right? Like, we have more initiatory structures, we have no more mystery schools. So when people encounter these things, they really are completely out of the blue. Whereas someone 1,000 years ago who encountered one of these things would at least have some sort of cultural framework with which to engage with it, or would know somebody who would know how to engage with it.
Yeah, that's the complete 100% point of Witness of Another World.
Mm-hmm.
This guy was completely like, what the hell's going on? Everybody was ostracized. He goes to the shamanic culture. They say, that's normal. You should feel special. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other thing I think is a set and setting thing. If mostly set, because if you've got certain problems in your life and some certain mental instabilities, which is probably why you're interested in this in the first place in a lot of cases. I know I have instabilities. Those instabilities will be magnified by the craziness of it, because it'll just it's tailor-made to conform to your belief system, because it's so nebulous that you can almost place any philosophical system that you can make up on it, and it fits really great as long as somebody that disagrees with you doesn't show up, because they'll be just as right.
True. What was the stuff he's talking about? He did mention Wilhelm Reich, and I think Wilhelm Reich is someone who still has a way to go before anyone really takes him more seriously. But I think Reich was definitely on to something with the whole orgone thing.
Yeah, I think he was looking at something, and he had a framework and a model for it, and his model worked for him, but doesn't work for everybody, and the same model does not. It doesn't follow for everyone, and also, I think he got very into that model, and it became self-referential. Doesn't mean it's wrong. Right. It just means it might be too specialized for other. I went to Rangeley, Maine. I went to the Reich home and lab. It was pretty amazing just to see where he worked, and all the lab equipment and the cloud busters that were like sitting around on the property just rotting, stuff like that. It was almost a spiritual thing, kind of.
Nice. And I always wonder how much of a connection orgone energy has to Kundalini energy as well.
I think they're probably both manifestations of the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, different cultural context, but similar.
Mm-hmm.
So, but let's see. He goes on quite a bit about gold, and that's one of those questions that's always bugged me, like why all these ancient cultures venerate gold. And he points out that it's a conductor of electricity, and speculates that some of these things may use gold to manifest here.
Yeah, I don't know. Go ahead. Sorry.
Or no, you go ahead, Greg. It's fine.
I don't know if I totally agree with him. It seems like he's forcing a lot into that gold thing. However, there's got to be a reason for it. I always thought it was just because one, it's hard to obtain, and two, it doesn't oxidize, and that's to some people that was probably amazing, because almost every other metal would rust, and gold wouldn't. Even silver rusts. Actually, it oxidizes. Gold will not. So to them, it represented immortality because it was incorruptible.
But it seems weird that every culture would make that connection.
Well, I mean, from an occult sense, gold is related to the sun, right? And so much of cultures worship like some deity related to the sun, right? Like the sun is the giver of life. And I feel like that association with gold makes it a sacred metal, and I think that's getting into some truth. Like, the reason you see these ideas expressed throughout multiple cultures isn't because of a single culture, but rather universal sort of truths bubbling up to the surface, regardless of the civilization.
Mm.
Yeah. Why did the pyramids appear everywhere? Well, because it's a simple shape and it's easy to build and it's very stable.
Mm.
Or there's a older culture that they're all connected to.
Or that, yeah. True. The human minds, I think, work pretty much in the same ways, and so you can make a case for either of those. The more exciting one is some single culture from way back when, which is
Ice Age,
yeah, which I do not doubt. For many years, all the stuff I read, I was like, wow, there was some other culture or some advanced civilization that just disappeared way before we had any records about it, and we had to start over again. But I still sort of think that.
Oh, I definitely think that. I think people like Graham Hancock and such have made really good arguments for such a thing.
Yes, exactly. It's almost Velikovskyan. There was it's catastrophism as an anthropological model.
Yeah, well, yeah, because the end of the Ice Age was a catastrophe. No matter what actually caused it, you had ice melting at a frantic rate, causing massive flooding, tidal waves, earthquakes, all kinds of stuff, and submerging the coasts, up to 300 feet in some areas.
Yeah. And the coasts are where everyone built stuff. Yeah, well, it's nice at the coast. The weather tends to be pretty good, depending on where you are.
And when your main method of transportation are boats,
Yes, and it's full of food.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not, more and more we find stuff off the coast of different places that are ancient structures, and a lot of times right where ancient legends said they would be, and that always amuses me, that they'll dismiss this stuff time and time again, and then they'll find it and go, oh, well, this one was true.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, as long as it's not done from a perspective of craziness, then it's fine. In fact, it won't be acknowledged until some crazy person said, "Well, that's where they said it would be." Well, that was just a lucky guess.
Right. So one of the things he talks about that I find really interesting is Keel says psychic ability to see UFOs is stronger where natural magnetic fields are stronger. And this is something that Robert Schoch also talks about with psi research, that when solar activity is higher, psychics score higher in lab tests. So it suggests that whatever this stuff is directly connected to our environment. Our ability to see it is directly connected to our environment.
Well, not only that, when some of the similar research that was carried out on remote viewing effectiveness, it was found that definitely geomagnetic flux affected remote viewing accuracy, but an even stronger indication, sometimes up to a factor of 3 or something in terms of accuracy, was actually local sidereal time of the viewer. So literally where the stars were.
They weren't looking at the center of the galaxy, apparently, that helped. I don't know what that was.
Yeah, exactly. So
what?
When the center of the Milky Way was not being exposed to you wherever you were on the Earth, they had a better hit rate.
Yep, exactly.
Whether that's a correlation causation thing or not, that was a very main point of what the remote viewing program, at least parts of it, found out. I'm sorry, Wren, go ahead.
No, that's fine. That's exactly right, and it underlies this idea that astrological knowledge and astrological science is getting to some kind of truth, right? For some reason, where the stars are in the sky affects things like psi, and possibly could affect people's moods, the way they see the world. You get into this and it's oh, well, maybe astrology isn't that crazy.
Yeah, and I don't, you don't know if it's because it's the influence of directly of those things, or it's a rhythm that just happens to coincide with certain things in the sky. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. I like Keel actually talks about the idea that it's a representation of the Earth moving through various cosmic energy fields.
Right.
You know, the stars in the sky, like where they are is immaterial. They're just the signpost. They're just letting you know we're in this part of the solar system right now.
Right.
And this, particular energy is affecting us. But yeah.
Yeah, that Mars effect thing, I always thought that was funny. There's probably a debunking of it somewhere, but the idea that some people from Psychop in the 70s, this was the whole basis of that Star Baby thing that Dennis Rollins published in, what was it, 40 in Time? I can't remember where it was. But he was in Psychop, and they did this study to disprove the Mars effect, meaning the astrological idea that people that were born when Mars was ascendant or whatever in their star chart were better at sports. And they found out that it was actually, there was a positive correlation, and then they tried to cover it up. Not just, not saying, not doing the smart thing and saying, well, it seems like there's one, but we don't know yet. I mean, this is just one study and whatever. No, they actively tried to cover it up and change the results. And that's when this one guy in Psychop said, whoa, wait. You're not doing science. You're just as bad as you're worse than the people that you're accusing. So
right. Wow, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, look it up. It's Dennis Rollins, and his essay is called Star Baby. I think I've actually got I think it was in 40 in Times. Somebody I think Info or somebody actually printed a little booklet that's just that essay. It's very interesting. Whether everything in it is true or not, I mean, at least just the attitudes of people that he worked with, like James Randi and who was the main guy at Psychop at the time? I can't remember his name, but anyway, that whole group, Phil Klass, all those people, he just said they weren't interested in the truth. They were interested in getting rid of people that they thought were superstitious.
Right.
And that, and he left over it, and Marcello Truzzi, who founded the Zetetic Scholar magazine and group, they left over the controversy. So they're like, look, we should look at this stuff scientifically, but we shouldn't shy away from something that where we don't appear to be right away.
Yeah.
You remain. Truzzi's thing is, if you want to be a skeptic, you remain agnostic. You don't take a position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's what true skepticism is.
Yeah, you do not make a decision on something until you have a preponderance of evidence to support whatever you're saying, which is
Yes.
science. And then be open to changing it if new data becomes available. But the founders of Psychop weren't like that, according to these two people.
You keep questioning. That's what a true skeptic does.
Yeah, I don't mind when people are skeptical. But what I mind is when they're fundamentalist skeptics, which is a Robert Anton Wilson thing, which I continually use, because there's skepticism and there's somebody that says they're a skeptic, but they have an inflexible belief system. So that doesn't mean they're a skeptic anymore.
Yeah. They're debunkers. Well,
I've talked to a few people that I know that are very heavily skeptical, and one of them admitted to me all he wants to do is prove to people that he's smarter than them. And I said, well, that's such a dumb motivation. And you're not even interested in the truth anymore, are you? Yeah, but what I believe is true. It's like, okay, whatever.
Wow.
I'm just trying to prove to them how deluded they are. It's like, but that's not what you say you're doing. What you say you're doing is trying to get at the truth. But what you're really doing is trying to aggrandize your ego.
Right.
Anyway,
they already know the truth.
But I don't, I just got down to brass tacks with one of these people on a private message one time, and that's what I found out. I didn't attack him. We're friendly enough that I wouldn't do such a thing, but it's just, I was like, wow, really? I mean, a suspicion I had was confirmed, and I hate to say it, but but not everybody's like that. But just this one person I was talking to, I was like, wow, okay, I'm glad you admitted that to me. Now we can move on.
Well, it's definitely a factor with some skeptics, certainly. And I think some of them are just don't like to acknowledge that there are things out there we don't understand, too. I mean, some of it just comes from fear. Yeah.
And to me, Keel was like an antidote for this. It's like, let's speculate our asses off and not worry about it for a while.
Yeah. I think a lot of it comes from a inability or a desire not to break away from material explanations of things. Like, I think that's the problem that comes up with astrology, right? Is that, like, we know astrology works, and not in the sort of flimsy horoscope kind of applies to everyone kind of way, but like in very specific ways. Like, my Mars is in Aries, which is like its rulership. I was born on a Tuesday in the planetary hour of Mars. And when I was in college, I was really obsessed with studying military history. And I didn't realize anything about the Mars stuff until much later, but I was like, oh, red's my favorite color. Like, I'm really into military history and movies about war and stories of like heroic warfare and stuff like that. So, and even very specific things like Pisces is in my 6th house, which is the house that kind of covers health and stuff. Pisces stuff relates to the feet, that part of the body. And my whole life I've had issues with my feet, like had problems with like gout flare-ups and things like that. Never can find shoes that fit. I've got all these like weird issues with my feet. And when you actually look at your stuff and see how it matches up to your life, and in like very specific ways that aren't just like you bending things to make it fit. Yeah. You're like, oh well, I guess this works. Like, but I don't know how. Like, I don't know why it works. And I think that's the step too far that a lot of skeptics can't take. They can't accept the fact that something might work and not have a physical basis for it.
Well, I think what they don't like is people use these beliefs as an excuse to either behave a certain way, ignore science, whatever it is. But I think their main complaint is the people, the use of it as a belief system, and then just by association, the belief system sucks because these dumb people are associated with it. I mean, well, on top of that, it just doesn't seem, it doesn't seem, like you said, it's not a materialist science way of looking at things. But I think that's changing in very subtle ways with people that are quite young right now, that are sort of quiet right now, but I think they're going to be louder as the years go on. And not because they're going to say astrology is real. They're going to say, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at what the underlying mechanism might be, if there is any, or what the correlations are, if there are some, and how often do they hold true statistically and all that. I'm sure that's been done.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, a lot of it, a lot of sort of the modern thoughts on how it works, is this idea that it's representative of like a cycle model. Yeah. And that's exactly what you were talking about before.
Yeah, that's the one I like right now.
Mm-hmm.
So in the 8th tower, he says, when a mass of energy enters the visible spectrum by turning red or violet, it must somehow be altering the frequency of its vibrations. These vibrations, or these frequency changes, are so well controlled that the object can vibrate at the exact frequency of the precipient's brain waves. When the object's pulsations are synchronized with the precipient's frequency, a medical phenomena occurs. The witness lapses into a hypnotic-like trance and hallucinates. If the percipient is psychic, the trance can seem like an extension of reality, and the hallucination will seem like a very real experience. In most cases, the witness will later note a great time discrepancy. The experience will seem to have taken more time or less time than actually expired. Witnesses without psychic ability will not become entranced, they will simply fall over unconscious.
He seems very sure about that statement.
Yes. There's a lot of stuff in the book.
Say, right? Well, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, I really like what? Well, I don't actually. I really like Stairway to Heaven, but it's not literally true. It's just a really fun song that's nice to listen to. That's how I think about that statement. It's like, well, I think you're really forcing it in a real way that it probably shouldn't be forced, but it's fun to think about. It's a nice model to branch off from, and I think he's trying to be almost too scientific about it. It could be true, but it's so detailed in the way that it makes a lot of assumptions, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
He tends to flip-flop on that too with his own book.
Yes.
Because sometimes he talks about how these entities have some sort of external reality or that they have agency, And then he goes on and speaks about them as if they were just hallucinations caused by vibrating energy or something.
Yeah, like I said, don't listen to Keel literally, or you'll get crazy. Listen to him as you're looking at a piece of artwork, or listening to a song, or reading a poem. There is a truth underlying all the noise, or whatever you want to call it. There's a truth underlying his brushstrokes, I think.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, the idea is not bad. I think there's a lot of stuff in this book that he just states as absolute truth. Like he's solved these things, and it's just a matter of time till everyone catches up with him, which is, I mean, it's part of the way he writes.
It's bombast. I mean, it's bombast for the sake of doing that, which is fine. Otherwise, people don't pay attention. If you go, well, maybe, if you kind of think about this in a certain way. No, it's like, no, this is the way it is. So everybody listens. That's what makes people listen. Wishy-washy people never get heard.
True. But I mean, the idea is very interesting. He seems to delineate between psychic and not psychic, like it's a switch. Like you're either psychic or you're not. Mm-hmm. But the vibration thing, I mean, it does make sense. We know both sound and lights can put someone in a hypnotic trance.
Right.
So that's not stretching it too much right there.
No, I mean, if there is some control associated with it, I think, and this is my co-creation thing coming up, you have to want to be hypnotized in some certain way. And if you are and you're receptive, whatever is within you that was dormant is now awake, and you can attribute it to the thing that affected you. It doesn't necessarily have to come from that thing. But then again, I've never had it happen to me, so I don't know. I mean, if I had it happen to me and I suddenly founded a religion, if somebody told me that's just something that came out of your own head, you saw something weird, I would absolutely know that they were totally wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's one of those many correspondences in this book to stuff in the occult, because the state, like, let's say you're going to do scrying work, you're trying to look into a crystal and talk to an angel or some sort of entity. In order to get into the state where that happens, you have to lull yourself or hypnotize yourself basically into a trance state. In the Solomonic method, that requires, days of fasting, praying all the time, and even before, like going through like a ritual bath, going to confession, and saying these incantations and stuff over and over again until you lull yourself into that hypnotic state. And, on one hand, Keel seems to imply that the hypnotic state is causing a hallucination, but I'm more of the mind that hypnotic state is sort of like the middle ground. It's like that bridge that they used to exchange spies on?
Yes.
It's sort of like that. It's that bridge, right? It's a bridge to communication with these entities. And that's why, sometimes these entities appear in dreams or things like that, because it's easier for them to meet you in a dream than it is to meet you in the real world. But if you're only meeting them in the real world, then getting to that middle ground requires some sort of altered state of consciousness, right? That consciousness, altered state can be reached through self-hypnotism, trance states, entheogens like mushrooms or ayahuasca. But it requires you to sort of build that bridge where they can sort of have a little foot in your world and you can have a little foot in their world, and then you can have a conversation.
And that's also Andrew Collins' idea in Light Quest, where he suggests these things are plasma intelligences, and that proximity to them kind of creates sort of this bubble reality where you're both giving a little bit into the reality in order to communicate.
Yeah, and that idea is very, very, very old idea.
Right. Yeah, you gotta meet it halfway, but then you have to kind of be careful that you're not taking things literally. You have to take it. It's almost like reading Keel. You have to take it. You have to take it as, this is my interpretation of it, but what is the underlying meaning and the underlying purpose of what's going on? If it's to make me a better person and things to improve in my life and others, great. If it's to make me a slave to whatever, to my desires or something that seems like somebody else's or some other thing's desires, then it's probably not good. Or if you're trying to, like I said, I told a friend the other day, magic to influence somebody's free will is black magic.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If they're not going to do what they were going to do anyway, and you just gave them a little like, hey, did you ever notice this? Then it's wrong. I mean, if you're trying to tell somebody to do something like a robot that they wouldn't have done normally, yeah, that's wrong. And so I think if the message is coming from somewhere telling you to kill yourself or other people or harm or whatever, that is if it didn't come mostly or all from you, it is a negative influence. I think Keel warned about this in the book in multiple places.
Yeah, I think so. Well, he also went with the idea that if you're, what did he say? Like, if you're not adept at this stuff, you're just going to get possessed if you try to contact spirits. And I don't know that that's necessarily the case.
Well, I think if you don't have a good sense of who you are, what you want, and that if anything is taking you off that to disengage or ignore it, I think he's right.
Yeah, or you're just not using an existing system. I mean, I think that's why you saw so much trance channeling and stuff in, like, the spiritualist movement, because it was like they weren't working on any of the existing frameworks that are meant and have been used by people for thousands of years to talk to these entities. Mm-hmm. I mean, that actually brings up something I wanted to go into, Seriah, if you don't mind me reading some passages.
Yep.
So when I was reading through Eighth Tower, I noticed, Keel talks a lot about demons. He mentions this stuff a lot. But he's talking about how people being possessed, right? And how they get controlled by this intelligence. But he says, I soon learned that this intelligence was also emotionally unstrung, childlike, even stupid. Battling this force is like battling a real tape in a computer. Unless it is following a carefully programmed procedure, it is discombobulated. There are clear-cut rules to the games it plays, and you have to abide by those rules. Demonic possession is just a game perfected by countless believers across centuries. Spiritualism is another. And of course, the outer space game is the latest development and currently the most important. Now, when he said this, what I immediately thought of was The Mysteries by Iamblichus, who was a Greek philosopher who wrote a lot about spirits in the 300s. In particular, I'm going to read this bit from Stephen Skinner's Techniques of Solomonic Magic, where he sort of quotes Iamblichus in this section. He says, there exists a certain class of powers that he calls, the daemons in the cosmos, limited, devoid of judgment, and highly irrational, which are capable of receiving and obeying rational instruction from another, but neither has any understanding of its own, nor distinguishes what is true or false, or what is possible or impossible. It is such a class that is at once stirred up and startled when threats are brandished at them, since it seems to me it is in their own nature to be led by appearances, and to be influenced by other things through a foolish and unstable imagination. And when I read that, I immediately thought of what Keel was talking about. This idea that these entities that Iamblichus is writing about over, 1,800 years, 1,700 years ago, are basically exactly the same as what Keel is encountering in the 1970s. These intelligences that have seemingly... I think him talking about the rules of the game is an important aspect, because typically engaging with these spirits or demons or whatever you want to call them, they work based on a set of rules. They're almost mechanistic in nature. You've got to say the right words, you've got to have the right circles, you got to have the right things drawn and the right tools and stuff, and you've got to give them instructions on what to do. And if you're not following sort of the rules of the game, they won't listen to you. Most of or just won't show up at all. And that they have, I thought, the one thing that really gets to me and kind of ties into Keel's thing about these entities making prophecies is the idea that these entities don't have any understanding of truth or fiction. It's not that they're often accused of lying to people, but it's not that they're lying. It's just that they literally don't know the difference between fiction and truth. So whatever they say, they believe is true.
Right.
That sounds familiar.
And it's just, I think I was talking about this on social media, that it's a little frustrating that it seems like we've known about these entities. And I'm not saying, like, to the listeners, I'm not saying that, you know, the entities that Keel's talking about, you know, the UFOnauts or whatever, that they're demons. I'm saying that we have known about these things for thousands of years. And we've known a lot about them for thousands of years. Like, Iamblichus is writing all of the rules down of how these things operate, you know, millennia ago. And yet it seems like every generation we're just rediscovering things that we already know. And it's a little frustrating because I'm like, are we just stuck in this endless cycle of rediscovering this stuff every 100 years? Or
well, part of it too is that it's a different perspective. Like it's a different framework on it, even though the information is the same. And I think that's why it doesn't get recognized.
I mean, some of the stuff though is like oddly specific. Like I know the three-toed footprints thing. Keel mentions it in the Eighth Tower. It's a big thing in like cryptozoology. It comes up in Hellier. And it seems to completely, and I haven't read Josh and Tim's new book, but I hope that they mention this, but everyone seems to. Yeah, I'm sure they mention the three-toed footprints, but do they mention that, like, demons have always had bird feet going all the way back to the earliest art we have of them? Like,
not in this volume, but the next one.
Okay. Yeah, like in the Bernie relief, like, you know, the Lilith or whatever, she has like bird feet. In Jewish folklore, the Shadim or the demons have bird feet, three-toed bird feet, in fact. And there was like art of one of these entities on like a sarcophagus in Xinjiang province in China. You know, it's like they always have these like three-toed feet. And so it's like, again, I'm not saying that people seeing these three-toed footprints are seeing demons, but that whatever these entities are, they have like a physical makeup that has not really changed in thousands of years.
Yeah. Either that or that's how it manifests in our reality. Whatever it is. But yeah, it's coming from the same thing. And I was wondering about this. Anybody ever seen a Bigfoot walking around with bird feet? I don't think so. But they'll hear Bigfoot and they'll see it, and then they go look at the tracks and they're three toes.
Right.
Yeah. And a lot of these creatures were, even though they had the bird feet, they were hairy, or they had horns. You know, like they were hairy creatures.
Yeah, that's a bird and a lizard thing. So you get a whole into, you know, reptilians and dragons and the whole bit.
Yep. And it just, I don't know. It's just like I said, it's kind of frustrating because it's like, when are we going to take all this information and synthesize it and move forward? Like, how do we go forward in our knowledge of these entities and what they are? By
not being afraid, and also, as you said, knowing all this stuff going into it instead of relearning it. I think there's a lot of like ignorance and fear associated with it too, and that if you posit some kind of teleological idea behind the negative entities, then the thing is, if you know that enemy, then you know when it's coming up, and you know how to deal with it. Because they also, I think these, correct me if I'm wrong, but these old texts told how to deal with it if you wanted to go on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's honestly, I've said this in a couple of other places, but this is the entire reason. After I read Passport to Magonia, I basically dropped the study of ufology and picked up the study of ritual magic. Yeah, because I had this realization that whatever these things were, they've been around for a very long time, and some people had methods of calling them on command. I mean, that's the whole fascist Carden thing where he talks to the sylphs and stuff. And I was like, that's what I need to learn how to do, because that's the only way I'm going to be able to really study this. I can't just go my entire life hoping that I'm going to see a UFO or that I'm going to have some kind of chance encounter with one of these entities. I have to figure out how to call them on the telephone.
Yeah, either call them on the telephone or have the telephone ready if they call. Because if you don't even know if you have the damn thing or don't have it in your pocket, you don't know how to answer it. And the other thing I was thinking when you said that is that I did the same thing in the early 90s when I started looking into this like really seriously. I didn't know it at the time because I joined the BOTA because I thought it was important for some reason in relationship to this. And what it was, and I didn't realize it till later, and this is what I'm thinking now, and I learned this from Keel, and from Valet, and from Aleister Crowley, and from you, and all these different people, is that if you don't know yourself first, there is no possible way you're going to make any headway in studying the paranormal.
True.
It's the same reason why Israel Regardie said, if you want to start in this, go through a heavy system of therapy first, psychotherapy. Because if you walk in and say, when do I get to smite? You shouldn't even be let in the door. So the thing is, you have to be okay with yourself and know what your motivations are and what kind of person you are before you start going through any of this stuff, or summoning, or even studying it. Because you keep running into people that, their whole personality in dealing with this is either unfocused, or worse, it's just ego aggrandizement, and they don't realize that.
Yeah.
And I'm not totally, innocent of that either, of course, but I think it's a huge problem. That people, it's a huge problem. Normally, people don't know themselves, but especially when you're dealing with weird stuff like this.
Agreed.
So there's my piece. To add on to your piece, I got to do my rant. So thank you.
Did you have anything else, Wren?
No, that's. I wanted to make sure that we covered that, because that was one thing that really struck me about the Eighth Tower. I was like, Keel is coming to the same conclusions that Greek philosophers in the 300s were coming to, and it kind of frustrated me a little bit, because I was like, we've got to like, I mean, in Keel's defense, right? Like, in the 1970s, when he was writing this, he didn't have access to the internet. He didn't have access to the wealth of research materials that we have today. I mean, even just in the last 10 years, there have been dozens of grimoires that have been translated or transcribed and are now available for people to study. We are currently sort of in a renaissance of that material.
Yeah.
So, now more than ever, people should be familiarizing themselves with it. Even if you don't want to practice it, just like knowing about it will vastly help your study of Forteana.
Yeah. I did pull a quote out of there, which is slightly relevant. And he said something to the effect of, we must be aware of the difference between what witnesses think they experienced and what they really experienced.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that what people think they experience and what people think they're studying is not, it is a, what's that called? A platonic shadow on the wall.
Yeah.
It's not what it is, but the thing is that people think that shadow is what it is, and it's just not the shadow it's the shadow that's being thrown of whatever framework there is behind this. And once you realize that it's a shadow, and you've got tools to deal with communicating with shadows, that maybe you can move forward. And it's going to be very individualized too. You can't just tell somebody, do this and this and this and this, and you're going to understand UFOs. No, it's kind of like, this is kind of a path. And once you get to a certain point, you will realize what your path is, and you will follow that one. And not everybody will be able to understand what you're talking about, and that's fine.
Yeah, the thing about the shadow, I think, to elaborate on that, it's the tendency will be to want to look at the light that's casting the shadow, right? But the light is blinding. It's undifferentiated. It's impossible to learn anything about, because it's just bright. We have to study the shadows, and that's why my kind of encouragement to people is, like, don't get locked into a system of thinking about this stuff. But in order to study it, you do have to adopt some system of it, right? Or else you're just going to be looking at the blinding light. So I choose to approach it from this like occult perspective and this sort of grimoire 16th century magical perspective of this thing. But I'm also aware that this is just one interpretation of that shadow, and
it works for you.
Yeah,
exactly. It is working.
And people have to find that for themselves.
Yeah, and it's the same thing where, like, an abductee or a witness or whatever, when they meet another abductee or witness or whatever, there's a lot of nonverbal stuff that goes on, or even verbal, where they both know that they're talking about the same thing. Even though they didn't see the same thing, they're not using the same words, but they know that they both experienced something very unusual and it affected them very deeply. Where people that haven't had that happen do not have access to that. There's no way for them to know that feeling.
Thinking about it, it is almost like taking a drug or like drinking, let's say like drinking alcohol, right? Mm-hmm. You want to drink enough that you get loose and comfortable and you can have good conversations with people. You don't want to drink so much that you end up in the toilet.
Yeah.
And studying this stuff is exactly like that. Like you need to pick some sort of framework to work with it. But you
be ready to throw it out too.
Exactly. You can't get too high on your own supply. You got to know when to get out. You got to know when, okay, I've taken this as far as I can go. I'm sort of becoming obsessed, or I'm kind of going over the top with this one idea. Time to switch it up a little bit. Come at this
or stop.
Yeah.
That's another thing, just stepping away from it, which is the hardest thing in the world. Yeah. It's like saying I can stop anytime I want. No, you know what? People that are into the paranormal cannot stop anytime they want. 99.9% of the time, you're addicted for life.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that. How many times have people said, that's it. I'm not, this sucks. I'm not going to have anything to do with it anymore. And then a week, a month, a year, 5 years later, they're like, so what's going on? It's like, you said you quit. So whenever somebody says, that's it, I quit, it's like, all right, I'll see you soon.
It makes me wonder whatever happened to Albender. I know he sort of retired and gave it all up and everything, but I wonder, did he really, or
I don't know.
Still communicating with these entities, even though he wasn't publicly talking about it anymore.
Yeah, maybe he was the one. I think he was the 1% that just doesn't ever come back to the public study. But that's the other thing is that that you make a great point is that when people say that's it and they actually do disappear, is that because they found their own understanding of it and they just don't really need to talk to anybody else about it anymore?
Yeah,
and I would encourage anybody that's into it to pursue that as a goal. Become start your own philosophy on it, and see if you can intersect with other people on parts of it. But a lot of this great work is done in private.
Yeah. We were talking about the three-toed things. There's a encounter he mentions with a giant, like this giant guy in a, I don't know, was it a restaurant or something like that this woman sees him and he doesn't fit in.
The toe shoes?
Yeah, and he talks about having shoes with 5 toes, and I'm thinking, well, those exist now.
It was a time loop, they saw something was going to happen in the future. It just happened to be right in front of them.
And they look probably just as silly then as they do now.
Yes, exactly. And that I think people don't really, I don't ever see anybody wearing them anymore.
Every once in a while.
I do. I guess, people that are trying to be fancy, but I don't think there's any health benefit to it, really.
No. Keel talks about lives falling apart after they have encounters, but I'm wondering how much of that has to do with the liminality of the experience.
Well, how so? Elaborate on that.
Well, we know that liminality can be something that summons inexperiences, but there's a lot of people who can't exist in that liminal sort of state. So once they've had an encounter, they've kind of entered that liminal state. That's why their life falls apart, because they don't know how to function like that.
Mm.
It's not so much that the thing was trying to destroy their lives so much as it has shifted something that they don't know how to adapt to.
Yeah, or they could be they were unstable to begin with, and this just knocked the last little brick out so that the whole thing could fall down.
Yeah.
Well, I think it goes back to Witness of Another World, right? Like you need to find people that can help you exist in that world, right?
Context.
Yeah, you've had some sort of, for lack of a better word, initiatory experience. Right?
Unplanned initiatory experience, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if you try to conceptualize that for yourself, you're probably going to drive yourself crazy. You have to find some sort of support system, and that's the big failure of the modern world, is that we don't have any support systems anymore for that sort of thing.
Right.
So he also talks a lot about the name game and how names, like really uncommon names will often have experiences, but common names don't. Or, two people on 2 sides of the country named the same weird name will both see a UFO within 24 hours, things like that.
Yeah. Wetzel. That's one of the big ones. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you guys make of that?
I have no idea. I mean, I wonder if it's not some sort of synchronicity thing. But then again, it's like, what is synchronicity? It's like,
yeah, well,
right.
it's a synchronicity for the person for Keel that found it out, but not for the people that it happened to.
Exactly, because they probably don't know about each other.
No, they don't, and maybe they had the experience so Keel could find out. I don't know. Lauren Coleman talks about this quite a lot in a couple of his books too, the name game thing.
Yeah, it's it makes you wonder how much we really understand reality around us.
Go ahead.
Synchronicity does too, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, and I wrote an essay on this a long time ago, like 10 years ago or 12 years ago. I was looking up the name Weitzel, and I also looked at, and for some reason I got down this rabbit hole on the internet, and there was the letter that Bill Moore got at APRO that like rooked him into the Falcon, MJ12 thing. Well, it's not really MJ12 thing, but that's what this came out of. The letter was written by somebody who said he was Charles Weitzel, and there really was a Charles Weitzel, but Richard Doty had apparently used the name and his account and elaborated on it without really saying anything to him, because he was like, I never wrote that letter. Yeah, I did have a sighting, but I didn't write that letter. And then I looked up for some reason, I looked up the name Doty, and there was somebody that was trying to sell that owned the Snippy the horse skeleton, the first one, and the person's name that was trying to sell it was named Doty. I mean, that's not a very common name at all.
Yeah,
but they just, and I think somehow or somebody got in touch with them. It's like, no, I'm not related to Richard Doty at all. I don't know who you're talking about. But they had to come into possession of the Snippy the horse skeleton, and they were trying to sell it, and they couldn't.
I thought a lot about how this could possibly, like the synchronistic thing could be, I guess I conceptualize it as the radiation that this stuff gives off. Because
you're saying metaphor, radiation is a metaphor.
It's a metaphor, not like an actual physical particle or anything.
Yeah.
But sort of a metaphor, right? Like,
okay, yeah.
Wherever this thing manifests itself, it's almost like reality gets more ordered and more chaotic at the same time.
Yeah.
So you see things like, and you see like different names pop up. I mean, maybe it has something to do with the collective, unconscious mind. But the one that's been tripping me out this past week is I'd actually found this out like a year or two ago when I wrote an article about it on my blog, but I was just revisiting it because of the project I'm working on. And there was this 1930s serial drama that was shown in theaters. It was like a Western sci-fi called The Phantom Empire that was about these cowboys like traveling into this underground ancient advanced civilization with like robots and ray guns and all this kind of stuff. It was apparently sort of based on the coming race.
Where can I see this? This is amazing.
It's on archive.org, the whole thing.
Oh man, I gotta go watch it.
Yeah, because it's public domain. And one of the main actors, and this is pre-Shaver Mystery, right? One of the main actors' name is Frankie Darrow. And anybody who's familiar with the Shaver Mystery will know of the evil detrimental robots, the Darrow.
Oh, I thought you meant Darrow like Darrow, as in like,
Yeah, it's spelled Darro, but pronounced it's almost exactly the same pronunciation. Yeah. Yes. And I think when I wrote the article, I put forth the idea. I wonder if Shaver had seen this in theaters, right, and then it making its way into his work later. But on the other hand, it could just be that these fictions aren't all in our head. They aren't all how some authors talk about they don't write a story, they uncover a story.
Right.
Yeah. That sort of all fictions and all narratives and all stories are kind of already out there in the ether, and all we do is pull them in. And sometimes people pull in different parts of it at the same time.
Yes, exactly. And I think the synchronicity is a tool to get to that. The thing is that you have to come upon it and know to follow it. I think a couple people have mentioned this. I think Jeff Kripal at either on my show or somewhere mentioned that synchronicities are like signposts. I think he said this. Synchronicities are like signposts going, hey, take a look pay attention now.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's something that's relevant, especially to you, going on right now. And if you can follow it, it may have some significance for you as long as you don't let it make you crazy.
Yeah, I think putting too much emphasis on it is dangerous, but I think it is useful as a signpost. Like,
yeah,
a good example of that. I visited London last spring, and right before that trip, I had done a conjuration of Astaroth, the spirit Astaroth, and I'd gotten great results out of it. So when I was in London, I was hanging out with some people from the OTO there, and I was talking to this one guy in particular about that work, and I was like, "Yeah, you should contact Astaroth too. Like, I got great results out of it. It was very approachable. Like, and a couple of days later, they were having a feast night in Vauxhall, and so I went down and had dinner with everyone, and was walking back to the tube station with the same guy that I'd been talking to the other day about Astaroth. And I asked him, I was like, "Oh, hey, have you done any work on it?" And he was telling me about, yeah, he'd done this one thing. We were discussing it, and I look off to my left, and there in huge red letters is the neon sign for a nightclub called Ashtar. And I don't think there was any deep meaning to it, but I definitely took that as a nod, just something saying, tipping its hat at me.
Yeah.
And, it's also possible, like, you got to wonder if we are creating parts of our reality, that things like that are part of that creation. They're not really important. No one else is really going to notice. There may be part of the reality we experience is just for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, exactly, because, I mean, even explaining to you guys, like, it doesn't really have any meaning for you because you didn't do the rituals that I'd been working with. You know? It only really had meaning to me, and even then, there wasn't much meaning to it. It was just sort of, the universe nodding.
Yes, of course. This is why I said if you come to an understanding about the UFO thing, it is going to be your own understanding. And it is going to be valid for you, but might not be valid for other people. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with, I'm not going to I can't literally have you agree with me, but in principle, and in, like we're talking here, we all basically have the same idea about this. Not the exact same idea, but, and I think good things can come from that when there's a group mind that agrees on something, even though, in fact, it's better if it's not agreeing completely, because that foment of ideas it's much better than having everybody on the same wavelength all the time.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, an enlightened group of UFO people, UFO researchers, and maybe people have had experience working together quietly. I love that thing that Keel constantly is saying. So and so is quietly working on this. I mean, he keeps bringing that up all the time. That seems to hold great significance for him. And I agree with him. The less noise you make about, this is an occult thing too, the less noise you make about what you're doing, the more effective it is.
Yeah, I mean, in particular with spirit work, sometimes spirits don't want you to talk about what you've talked about to other people. They want to keep your conversations quiet or to yourself, or they'll give you secrets that you're not supposed to tell anyone else. So
right.
Yeah,
exactly. And then, throughout life, you're going to be tested on that. And if you tell too many things, one, it'll bite you in the ass. And two, people won't want to work with you anymore.
Yeah. And the spirits won't want to work with you anymore. They can't trust you. So why would they continue to answer your calls?
There's ego again. As much as, that's a huge problem with a lot of this. It's just that there's the thread that gets pulled on is a loose ego thread. Like, oh boy, everybody's going to think I'm smart if I say this.
One of the things Keel talks about in here is microwave radiation. I mean, a lot of this is about fields and energy from different levels of reality that we can measure. I mean, who knows what else is out there? But he talks about microwave radiation and its effect on witnesses and how some witnesses, but not all witnesses, show signs of being exposed to microwave radiation.
Yeah. In particular, I think like the feelings of heat which is, it's funny because Keel wouldn't have known this, but later in the 2000s, I remember, I think these were used in Iraq, and they're sometimes used in crowd control around the world, but like microwave cannons.
Yeah,
and how
active denial system.
Yeah, active denial systems. Yeah, and they create that sense of like burning under the skin, and that sounds exactly what these people were describing when they encountered these, luminous flying objects in the past.
Yeah, it's I think it's a wavelength that doesn't penetrate the skin, so it doesn't like cook you from the inside, but it certainly affects. I guess the wavelength affects the surface of your skin to the point where it's unbearable burning. So.
And why would only certain UFOs have that effect on people?
Different planets, dude. I don't know.
Different propulsion systems.
Yeah. Well, I think it's if you want to get real literal, but if you don't want to be so literal, I think it's because maybe the experience conforms itself to whatever is going to affect that person the most. I suppose if they need to be. I mean, that's very vague, but I hope you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
That there's a reflexivity there that is for each witness. I would dare to say I bet there'd be some where like some people felt the burning and others didn't, and they were in the same general vicinity.
That would be interesting. Yeah. Well, it does bring up. Or go ahead. Sorry.
No. Go ahead.
Well, it does bring up. So he talks about this later in the Eighth Tower. This idea of the physicality of the phenomena, right? Like, it does have a physical element. There are burn marks, scorches. People do get like physically injured sometimes when encountering these things. And the thing I thought was really fascinating was his whole theory that the structures and the creatures involved are sort of created ad hoc from raw materials, like specifically carbon, and that this ties into the slag that drops off of UFOs, the angel hair or the slag.
Right.
It mostly seems to be just made of regular old carbon, not even anything like the most common element. And that whole section I thought was really fascinating because I don't know exactly how far I'd go into that, but I think that is a fruitful avenue for research. Like, I would love to know if the metamaterials that have been studied turned out to just be carbon.
I think they're mostly, at this point, all I keep hearing is not isotopes, but various levels of magnesium, I think, is present in a lot of them. I don't know about carbon so much, but yeah, there's magnesium, and well, that's the only thing I can say for certain. I was going to say titanium, but no. I think they're predominantly magnesium or isotopes of magnesium, or magnesium mixed in ways with other elements that is, either unheard of or unnatural on the Earth.
And it does tie into some of the occult stuff that I study in that, like in traditional necromancy, in order to materialize a shade of a deceased person that you were trying to, conjure up from the underworld, you needed blood. You needed raw material in order to sort of give them enough physical form to communicate with them. And I thought about how that could relate to, I don't know where I fall in the cattle mutilation spectrum. I tend to think a lot of the cattle mutilation stuff that the big stories that were happening in the Southwest might have been related to Operation Gas Buggy. And
Gas Buggy?
Yeah, you're not familiar with Gas Buggy, Seriah?
No.
So, okay, so near the end of the Cold War, we had this huge stockpile surplus of nuclear weapons and nothing to really do with them. So the idea of using nuclear weapons as fracking, as like bombs for doing fracking, was floated. And there were apparently some tests actually carried out where basically we just blew up underground.
Well, one, as far as we know.
Yeah, one. So, yeah.
Near Dulce, New Mexico, actually.
Yeah, of all places. And I've had the theory for a long time that some of the cattle mutilation stuff in that area was because somebody may have all of a sudden gotten worried that they had poisoned groundwater supplies or something with radioactive fallout. And they were basically testing these cows to see if they had buildup of radioactive isotopes in their lymph nodes, tongues, places where those would build up. And that the sort of UFO thing was kind of thrown onto it as a way to provide plausible deniability and to, deflect interest in the subject. Because they couldn't just come out and admit that, because then it would cause a huge panic, and they would maybe, have to pay reparations to cattle ranchers. It would just be a huge mess, right? If they said all of a sudden, oh, we might have poisoned the meat supply of the U.S. But then again, too, there are ancient stories of cattle mutilation, like from Italy, where these balls of light descend. They called them witches, but they were basically balls of light that would descend from the sky and rip apart cattle. So what do we make of that? And it makes me think, too, about sacrifices. Typically, sacrifices to gods or to spirits or whatever to provide material for them to manifest was livestock, cattle, oxen, sheep, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Chris O'Brien goes through this extensively in his books.
Oh, neat. Okay.
And the other part of that, very astute of you to notice that without reading his books, or at least many of them. But I got that straight from looking at Chris's stuff, and David Perkins, for that matter, who's kind of like Chris's guru. And you can see why if you talk to him. But the first thing you would think was, well, there's not, gas buggy was supposedly only in one spot, and it failed because the natural gas they were trying to get out was radioactive. What a surprise. They got a lot of natural gas, but they couldn't use it because it was all radioactive. But, does that apply in other parts of the country or the world? No, it doesn't. However, you make a good point there, Wren, because what Chris found out is that, apart from all the weirdness associated with cattle mutilations, which cannot always be put down to, government people or cults or crazy people or whatever, it can't all be put down to human intervention. It could, but it'd be really, really, really unlikely or difficult. What he found, I'll tell you one thing. One of the people that worked at Skinwalker, I asked him one time at a convention. I said, "Well, could all this, at least the all the taking out of the organs and stuff, be done by a human?" And the guy said, "Well, yeah, but you'd have to be the best veterinarian in the world and know anatomy exactly and be able to do it in the dark, which is really, really unlikely. But I guess you could do it. Also, some of them get taken somewhere else apparently and then come back and dropped." But the other part I was getting to was that what Chris found out is the majority, it might be almost all, a large majority of the mutilation areas happen to be, here's a correlation causation thing, downstream or downwind from nuclear power plants and nuclear waste dumps. Or downstream. Did I say that? Yeah, downstream, downwind of these areas.
Yeah.
So that's there's so much that, and if you look at the mutilation thing, it's like as Chris said, the one explanation that he's come to is no explanation. No one explanation makes sense. They all have pluses and minuses to them, but none of them are all inclusive. Just like the UFO thing.
Yeah, but it is probably a spectrum of things. Like some of it probably is the government testing these cattle for radiation sickness or buildup of isotopes within their tissues.
Or mad cow or some pathogen that was being experimented on that got out into the animal population.
But then that doesn't cover everything, like you said. There's
no, it doesn't.
Yeah,
that's what Gabe Valdez thought it was when near the end of his life when I talked to him about it. He was almost convinced that it had to do with testing of some pathogen. That would devastate the beef industry if it was found out that it was actually, something that they had to worry about and destroy cattle because of it, like they did in Britain during the mad cow scare.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Keel also talks about people who have died from UFO encounters. I mean, there's a famous one from South America somewhere where the guy's skin and everything just like slips right off his body.
God, that one's horrifying.
Isn't it?
I'd forgotten about that one, but yeah, that one is ugh.
Yeah, I think the first time I read about that was in a Salvador Fachado's Visionaries, Mystics, and Contactees book.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I think Keel either read it there or talked to the same people or something. But yeah, that's like a kind of a little known sort of undergroundly famous case, which I've never seen anybody verify in any way.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, having a better source on that, because I did think when I was reading it, this almost sounds like something that was made up. Like, because it doesn't fit anything else really. I mean, the only thing I can think of it that's even close is like Cash Landrum, right? Where where the women like got really sick afterwards, and it seemed almost like radiation poisoning. But this guy, like, his skin melted. Like, that's so far beyond.
And with no pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just watching it happen, and then he dies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that sounds like a made up story, but then again, it's not unheard of for somebody to have a disease where that happens. I guess it's like a extremely fast form of leprosy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. But didn't he mention a few others where people have died after UFO encounters?
I think he did, and there's been cases like that, but it's really rare. I think more it is that people, they get messed up by them. They have lasting a physical problem. Like as if they'd had radiation poisoning, or more recently as if they'd had blunt force trauma to their heads.
What's that from?
I think that was talked about in that lecture that Kit Green and Gary Nolan gave at MIT, I think, or Harvard last year.
Oh, okay.
I think they were talking about something that looked like injuries, but nobody had actually sustained any real injuries, but they looked like trauma injuries from UFO encounters, I think. And some of them, made people change their personalities, and other ones it actually really destroyed their health pretty bad. And I think there's people that are still living with that. But I don't think they really talk about it. I don't think. Anyway, I think that's what they talked about. If I'm wrong, somebody should correct me.
And he also talks about the weird radio waves that we've picked up throughout the years since radio was first invented. And I think a lot of those have been explained, but there's still some weird ones out there. It's also, it's like the canals on Mars that everyone saw until we got better telescopes, and then they just weren't there. And it's like, so what was everyone seeing?
Bad optics and pareidolia, I guess.
Maybe. But
then again, Lowell drew them very specifically in the same way each time. But he was using the same telescope, so.
Yeah.
With the you were talking about UFOs causing like head trauma and stuff. Something that Keel does mention that could explain that is he mentions the idea of air being displaced when these things materialize, sort of creating a sonic
going
boom.
away.
Oh.
Yeah. Suddenly the air has to get out of the way immediately.
Yeah. So something like an overpressure wave. I mean, that's what kills you. When an explosive goes off near you, it isn't the explosive that kills you; it's the pressure wave that turns your brain into jello.
Yeah. Yeah, or other parts of your body too. But I guess that'd be the most delicate part. That was the most delicate part. Like somebody could probably punch you in the heart, but if they punch you right in your brain, that probably wouldn't be.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the resilience that your heart does as a muscle. Yeah, I don't know. That sounds like pseudoscience BS, but
well, it does make me think about the whole materialization thing. That is something that Ingo Swann mentions in Penetration when he gets taken up to, he thinks it's like somewhere in Alaska to see that UFO materialize, and he literally sees this UFO sort of constructing itself out of nothing. It just starts as a little pinpoint of light, and then it sort of builds itself. And it only takes like a minute for it to fully appear. And if we take the perspective that in some cases these are structured craft, whether or not they were constructed, they seem to have a physicality to them, enough so that they can displace air. I mean, the one thing about this, and I guess this ties into the propulsion system thing. Are there that many cases of UFOs creating sonic booms? I know there is like the phenomenon of like phantom sonic booms, right?
Yeah. I don't think there's any cases of UFOs creating sonic booms. They're moving so fast that they should, but they don't.
Right.
and there's certain ideas about how that would come about. But yeah, so that where you wouldn't actually, in essence, you wouldn't be displacing the air, but moving through it as if there wasn't a thing moving through the air. I can't remember how the theoretical physics around that worked. Mm-hmm. I think actually TTSA was looking into that, but to exploit it as some kind of technology. But it would either be one, because the things aren't physical, or two, they figured out a way to not have the air notice that the object is there moving through it, in essence.
Right. And I think Keel mentions, too, this theory that even though these things are constructed ad hoc, they aren't entirely solid, or they aren't very heavy. Like, they're still mostly just air.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, like these Bigfoot and stuff are so big but can move so quickly or just vanish into thin air, is because they really are just vaporous.
Well, but they do leave footprints or landing marks here and there.
Yeah, actually, now that I think about it, like, that is how the sort of the daemons or the spirits, the sublunar spirits, are described. They're composed of air and fire.
Mm. But they can have the same effect on the physical environment as if they weren't.
Yeah, exactly.
Like these things. I think if you in kind of in a summary of that, if you look at the UFO thing and things associated with it literally, you're already lost.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't be literal about it. That's why I have that T-shirt that says "Mimic the obliqueness of the subject." If you're going to study it, don't study it head on, because if you do, it's going to show you exactly what you expect or want or need to see. Well, maybe not need, but expect or want to see, not what's there. But if you approach it at an off angle and not expecting something and being open to what happens and what the reaction is, then maybe you get more out of it. And this is an attitude I pulled directly from reading Keel for many years, I think.
Mm-hmm. 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 All right. Well, we are out of time.
Did we actually talk about the book?
We did.
We did. Yeah. We talked about the stuff that comes from reading the book. People should go out and read the book.
Yes, please read the book. I'm sorry I interrupted.
It's it's fairly short. It's about 200 pages in the paperback. It's it's a day or two read, but it's definitely worth the read. It's one of my favorite books from him, along with Mothman Prophecies. But I think I like Disneyland of the Gods a little more than Operation Trojan Horse. I definitely like the name Disneyland of the Gods.
Yeah, it was a phrase he used in other books, and then I think it was that was published. It was like a bunch of essays he strung together for that book, but I think so. And bridged with other stuff that was new. And it didn't Illuminate originally publish that.
I don't remember.
I think it was a late book by Keel, and it was when Illuminate was still around. I'm not sure. Oh no, it was Amok. It was Amok Books published.
Okay.
That. Yeah, the original printing of that.
All right.
Early 90s or late 80s. Go ahead.
Was it that late?
I think so. I mean, I've got it out on the shelf. I can go look. But anyway, go ahead.
Where can people find you guys, Wren?
So I have a blog at liminalroom.com. And people can find my contact info in there and send me an email, or check out my Etsy store where I'm selling some occult tools and material. And it'd be awesome if you could support me there.
All right. And Greg?
I am running back from the other room. Mainly just go to the RadioMysterioso.com site. Yes, copyright 1988 by John A. Keel. Is Disneyland of the Gods, yeah.
I always thought that was one of his earlier ones. All right.
Yeah, Amok Press. I mean, that's who originally published it, and I remember encountering it then and saying, all right, a new book from John Keel.
All right. Well, thank both of you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much. Really enjoyable, as always.
I'd like to take a moment to thank all of my Patreons. You're the ones who make this show possible. An extra special shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more. Allison Cook, Lindsay Trebet, Super Inframan, Tim, David Moore, Vincent Trewell, The Great Change, Stone Wilderness, Luke Osborne, Rob Drummond, Alex Whitcomb, Damian Tallman, Edu Camahort, Tactical Therapist, Janet Bunderson, 36 Dingo, Maria, Sam Sheeran, Jennifer Campbell, American Rambler, Kevin, John Rutledge Foster, Eric Citron, Andy McNamara, Matthias Sumby, Dominic O'Malley, Christopher Vaughn, Riker and Stark, Sean Cosgrove, Jose A., Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cicernos, Ray Benedetto, Linz Jackson K., Alfred Tuttle, Matthew Sproul, Kevin Schreck, Patricia Giaquinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Chris 646, Carla Mahoney, and James Lattimore. Thank you all so very much. All right, and we may do a second part to the Eighth Tower show with some different people. We'll see how that goes. But that'll be in a bit, if it happens at all. Right now, I'm actually sitting on a few shows that we have recorded, and a couple of Patreon segments already that I'm going to be putting up, and have more stuff planned. So in the next few weeks, you're probably going to get at very least 2 shows a week, if not maybe 3, and a couple of maybe 3-4 different Patreon segments coming up. We'll see how all this goes in the next few weeks. All right. I mean, some of it's recorded, so it's definitely going up. It's just a matter of spacing things out a little for everyone. And I will see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.